And we're here with Noor Siddiqui, who is the founder and CEO of Orchid, a reproductive technology company. Noor, welcome to the Optimal Performance Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me here.
So, I guess I'd like to start with the first question, which is what is how did you get into this? Do you just love babies? Do you have this this beautiful view of a utopian future where every child is born as healthy as possible? Like what got you into reproductive technology?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a winding journey. So I grew up watching my mom get diagnosed really young, early in life, or in her early 30s, with a really devastating diagnosis. So she got hit with this disease called retinal pigmentosa. It's pretty rare, and what it means is that her retina was going to degenerate throughout her life. So basically, she was going to go progressively blind. And I just was extremely. It just struck me as extremely unfair. Why is it that for some people they win the genetic lottery in the sense that they get these genes that don't hijack their life later, and why for some other people, for someone who had perfect vision throughout her entire life and then suddenly out of nowhere finds out that something that we all hold very dear, like our vision, is going to get progressively ripped away from her throughout her life. So that got me really interested in genetics from a very young age, and I went to Stanford thinking really excited about computer science, writing programs, not thinking that those two interests would ever intersect. But then I found out that genetics is increasingly becoming a computational science. So now we have these really vast data sets, hundreds of thousands of individuals with sequence information. So basically their genetic data that's been read paired with physician verified diagnoses. So what this means is that for the first time ever, genetics isn't this like hunting and pecking of, okay, there's these very rare conditions like cystic fibrosis, which you may have heard of, where there's one variant that's responsible for the disease. Instead, it's this computational challenge of let's build these models that look at millions, billions of locations across the genome of an individual and find out how we can measure susceptibility, so a predisposition to a disease, much more accurately. And once I saw that the data was there to, for someone like me, a computer scientist, to be useful, I got really excited about, okay, what's the most high impact use of this technology? And for me, I grew up really scared that this was going to be a condition that was going to affect me, that was going to affect my siblings. I also have heart disease in my family. My grandfather, unfortunately got a, triple bypass at a really young age. His life completely changed based on that. He ended up ultimately dying of a stroke. And, that disease sucks. Everyone has disease in their family. They don't like to talk about it, but it just sucks. And the ability to, as a parent, to be able to meaningfully impact the health of your child, to be able to make them statistically less likely to develop a disease, is something that is what I want my life's work to be. That's like the hill that I'm willing to die on. I think this is the type of information that every couple should have before they conceive, and that's what Orchid feels really fortunate and grateful to be able to bring to parents during this really important, consequential moment in their life.
Wow! Oh my gosh! Wow, that's fascinating. It's interesting to me that you found your way to genetics after working on computation. It's like, oh well, how do I marry these two? That's beautiful. Walk us through exactly how Orchid works. I think I've done reproductive episodes before, and the importance. We went through a lot of statistics on infertility, and the guest was a fairly old school kind of guest, and so I'm interested to see the sort of contrast from the content that he came up with. So if you could, this is a silly question, but if you could, let's start with explaining Orchid to us as if we were third graders.
Yeah, for sure. So Orchid helps couples have healthy babies. And the way that we do that is we've developed a new type of genetic test for couples who are planning on having a child. And what we do is we analyze both partners' DNA and identify the disease risk that's most likely to impact their future child's health. So we're looking for the top diseases, things like cancer, heart disease, schizophrenia, diabetes, conditions that really matter. And unlike most genetic tests where there's not something that you can actually do about the results that you get, one of the options that we offer is an embryo report where we actually quantify the level of risk in each embryo so couples can select the healthiest embryo to implant. So like overall, like, our goal is to give couples peace of mind and to give their children a better chance at a healthy life. But that's sort of the high level explanation of what we're up to.
Okay. So does this suggest that this is specifically for like IVF treatments rather than, doing it the old-fashioned way?
Yeah, so let me just drill into the details, I guess. So there's two linked products. So the first product that we have is called a couple report. So this is a patient-initiated at-home saliva test. So any couple that's planning on conceiving, it's not invasive. You just grab a spit kit from us, and we sequence the entire genome of both you and your partner, and we provide you the most comprehensive genetic risk assessment of whether or not you individually and your future child is going to be at elevated risk for any of these conditions that really matter. So we look at brain health, heart health, general health, so and cancer. So we look at, if you want, I can give you the full list of diseases that we're looking at is schizophrenia, Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, stroke, breast cancer, prostate cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and we're giving couples this sort of red light, green light. Are you at normal or elevated risk for passing on these diseases to your child? And if you are at elevated risk, we're actually quantifying how much mitigation would be possible if you were to go through embryo testing. So let's say a couple's at elevated risk for schizophrenia, not the couple's future child is expected to be elevated for schizophrenia. We tell you, okay, if you were to create 5 embryos or 7 embryos during IVF, what is the level of risk that you'd be able to mitigate? Are you going to be moving your risk from 4 times the population average to the population average? So are you going to be moving from elevated risk to normal risk? So basically, we're trying to provide quantitative, specific information for each individual couple about what is the level of risk that their future child is expected to inherit. And then we do that based on basically simulations and modeling, right? So we take the whole genome of both partners and we say, what are all the different combinations for, genetically what your children could inherit from the two of you? And that provides a risk assessment that they can use to decide what their next steps are. So, we're totally for, traditional conception. For a lot of couples, they're going to find out they're at normal risk. They're going to have, 100%, they're going to have, peace of mind saying, okay, we're good to go. We should just conceive traditionally. But for other couples, now they have this new option of, I've met a lot of couples who they have really devastating disease in their family. They have, they've seen a brother or sister go through cancer. They've seen a brother or sister go through something like schizophrenia, and then that's scared them so much about having a child that they've chosen just not to have one at all. And I think that's really devastating. Why is it that some people carry this risk and aren't able to feel confident conceiving, and other people, won the genetic lottery, they're healthy, they don't have anything to worry about? So we want to make sure that every couple, no matter what family history they have, feels empowered to be able to safely conceive, and that's what this report provides. It provides a lot of people peace of mind, and it provides, for people who find out that they're at elevated risk, like an actual action plan for what they can do. So the only action plan isn't going through IVF, and so during IVF, the second side of the product, we provide embryo reports. So for each individual embryo that you create, we sequence each of them and then quantify the level of risk that they would have, and then you and your clinical team are able to prioritize the embryo that's lowest risk for the disorder that you're worried about. But that's not we're not telling every couple, oh, if you're elevated risk, you got to go do IVF. That's definitely not our stance. It's just one of many options. So, you'll speak with a genetic counselor and you can decide, okay, do we want to make some lifestyle changes? Do we want to change our nutrition? Do we want to change the biometrics that we're monitoring for ourselves and for our child? Do we want to go advocate for ourselves and go get additional preventative screening? There's so much that you can do with this knowledge that currently is just a complete black box, right? You just sort of have this vague idea of, oh, I have a family history, like Aunt Greta has X, and it's like, well, how much does that affect me? You have to sequence your genome to find out how much genetic risk you individually carry.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, I definitely do want to get into the embryo testing and the follow up for the changes that you can make to have the greatest outcomes. But I do want to dig in a little the science a little bit, and I as I ask these questions, some of these may not be fair, but that's just because I don't, I try my best to keep up. But do we presuppose? Is it safe to assume that if egg from the gal and sperm from the guy, if both of them have a higher likelihood of Alzheimer's or diabetes, does that almost always translate to an increased likelihood of Alzheimer's in their offspring?
Yeah, so I think this is where there's an enormous amount of nuance that I'll quickly nerd out on. So basically, there's sort of this concept of like old school genetic testing and then modern genetics. So old school genetic testing is just looking at these single gene, like kind of Punnett square type, recessive conditions. And
Mm-hmm.
the problem with old school genetic testing is that it's really incomplete. So the vast majority of diseases that most of us care about, like heart disease or diabetes, it's not driven by do you have this one SNP, this one variant or not, really. It's about collectively there's millions of variants that are contributing to your overall risk. So old school genetics is just addressing this, less than 1% of the population who have these really rare variants that are very highly penetrant that confer very high risk. So basically, the type of modeling that we're doing is much more complex and sophisticated than that. So basically, you could get a old school type of test that just says, okay, you have one variant, right? But that one variant is a very small fraction of your overall risk for the disease. So that's why a lot of times people are really uninformed, because they'll say, oh, I don't have any genetic risk because I took this one test. But the reality is that one test that they took evaluated less than 1% of their genome, right? They're looking at a really small fraction. It's basically like it's like reading reading a book and just looking at the chapter summaries instead of actually reading the content of the book, right? It's like one page versus 1,000 pages, and that's sometimes gets lost in translation because people think, oh, every genetic test is the same, and that's unfortunately not the case. You can evaluate you can evaluate as few as just a handful of variants, or you can evaluate the entire genome. So your genome has 3 billion bases in it. So we're looking at every single one of those. Most of these tests are looking at less than 1% of the variants that are actually going to be contributing to your overall risk. So that's why it's really important for us to do the modeling on both sides. We're projecting your risk based on these millions of factors that are collectively going to drive risk in your future child. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as a Punnett square to say, okay, one person's has one variant that's high risk or low risk. We're actually looking at literally millions of combinations for how these variants can recombine in a child. So it's unfortunately not that simple. It is the case that couples who are both high risk can have a child that's low risk. So basically, between you and your siblings, you share about 50% of your DNA, and that's usually pretty surprising to folks, because sometimes I'll ask, between siblings, how much DNA do they share? And their knee-jerk reaction is they'll say 100%, and I'll say, well, then what are twins? How much DNA do they share?
Yeah, right.
So yeah, basically, it's just important to recognize that since siblings, so different embryos are, they obviously have a lot of shared DNA, but they do have different variants as well that they're inheriting, and that's why you do see variation where even if both partners carry risk for a specific disease, depending on the number of embryos that they create and depending on the genetic architecture, so specifically which variants are contributing to overall risk, it can be the case that even when both partners are high risk, there is a possibility of creating an embryo that's low risk. And unfortunately, you can't give really general answers. We could always reduce risk by 25%, and it's not like that. We have to look at the specific DNA of the partners that are choosing to have a child, and then we have to look at a specific disease that they want to mitigate. And the other important disclaimer here is that genetics is a factor for all of these diseases, but it's not diagnostic, right? So if we go and tell you your normal genetic risk for a condition, that's not a guarantee that you're going to have a healthy life, right? So, right. And similarly, if you're at elevated genetic risk, that's not a guarantee that you're going to get the disease. It just means that you're predisposed. It means you're 3x, 4x, 5x, sometimes 10x more likely to develop the disease. But again, it's not a guarantee, and I think that parents should, or couples who are receiving the information should acknowledge that it's a factor, and it's something to consider, but it's not, we're unfortunately not there yet to be able to say something is fully diagnostic.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said this is not a fair question, because this is not simple me tries to dumb it down into a Punnett square, like, oh, well, it's, you got, this is, you definitely got it, or you definitely don't got it, or your kids, future kids will. Does this work the other way? So many questions. So many simple questions. Does it work the other way? For instance, based on the test, the saliva test from, future parents, can you also screen for like fast twitch muscle fibers and musical talent and bilingual capabilities or like being double jointed?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that the type of trait stuff is super interesting, but Orchid is like really focused on disease mitigation. So we're really focused on what are the risks that have the most genetic component, where there's the best scores to stratify risk for individuals. So we're really squarely focused on health optimization, but I think that there's lots of sort of like fun genetic tests that you can take that'll tell you sort of some of this trade information is just not our sweet spot.
Yeah, got it. So, what does Orchid? Well, I guess that kind of answers that question. Is like, what is it not? I mean, obviously you have your area of focus, which is health optimization. How does Orchid distinguish itself specifically from other tests that were available? Like, is this the first of its kind where it's like direct to consumer versus like going in and working with your doctor?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of distinguishing ourselves from other companies, that's not too much of an issue. Like we're totally like category defining company, right? There's no other genetic test that you can get that provides this level of information in this context. So no other genetic test on the market is going to run a simulation and tell you what your future child's genetic risks are. And we do that not only for your future child, but we also do that individually for you. So we report on you and your partner's risk for heart disease, schizophrenia, all of the same conditions that we report on for your future child. So other tests that are on the market, something like 23andMe and Ancestry, they're looking at less than 2% of your genome, and they're not using sort of these advanced statistical models to quantify your risk for these conditions that are actually really important. All the other tests are looking at, okay, for really rare conditions, these like 4,000 or so really rare diseases where there's just one gene on or off. Do you have it? That's kind of where the rest of the market is sitting on. Okay, let's focus on rare disease. So things like a carrier screen, they'll actually just sequence a fraction of the genome of one partner, and then if that result is positive, then they'll say, okay, let's sequence the male partner. So it's basically this it's great. I think people should do that, but it's addressing a much smaller fraction of overall disease risk. So we're the first company, the first test to fully sequence the genomes of both individuals and then report on the diseases that really matter. So the most highly prevalent conditions that are affecting us. And then we're also the only company that on the other side actually offers a mitigation option. So instead of just telling you, hey, your future child's going to be high risk, we actually offer the ability to do embryo testing and mitigate that risk.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, that's fascinating. Interesting. You said industry establishing technology. That says it all, right? And you're the first to do this. That's really cool. So guy and a gal doing the spit test, they send it in, they get the results. I'm sure everybody's just like a mixed bag. Normal. You go to the website. Your website's beautiful, by the way. It really does explain exactly how it works, and shows examples of some of the test results. So I assume that in any given test, there's going to be lots of things that are normal. There's going to be a few things that are abnormal or high risk, or a few things that are low risk. So then beyond, once you get those results, I guess my question is like, well, what besides the obvious things like nutritional changes, lifestyle factors, stress and sleep and those sorts of things, like when someone gets the result that their future offspring will or have really like a really high potential for diabetes, let's say. Is there specific protocols or specific things that your team like instructs to help people make changes in their lifestyle to help like reduce that risk or lower that risk?
Yeah, so it's really disease dependent. So I would say that there's a lot of really interesting technology that's coming on the market that allows people to really monitor their biometrics. So for something like atrial fibrillation, I think that Apple's doing an incredible job of this, right? Right on your wrist, you can tell the time, you can go on a run, and you can also, monitor whether or not you're having an abnormal heart rhythm, right? You have an EKG on your wrist. So I think that monitoring biometrics is going to be a huge part of how people proactively monitor their health in the future. We have continuous glucose monitoring to monitor your diabetes risk. So I think monitoring your biometrics is a huge part of just staying on top of these conditions. So you can know, in real time, am I in the normal or elevated range for this disease? And that way you can more closely know, okay, how is a specific action, like a change in my exercise or a change in my diet, actually affecting my overall disease risk. And I think that another huge thing here is that, the sad part for a lot of these diseases is that oftentimes people are going on a diagnostic odyssey to find out, what the root cause of their symptoms actually is, right? You'll go to a primary care doctor and they won't know. And, I have friends who are in their, mid 30s getting diagnosed with, IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, or type 1 diabetes. And, they were suffering. They had all this, lethargy, or they were just not able to eat certain foods, and, they were just misdiagnosed over and over and over again. So if you know ahead of time, okay, I'm at elevated genetic risk for this specific condition, you can more proactively seek out, a professional who can evaluate for you for those risks. So I think that's also, just early knowledge is super valuable to just short circuit these sometimes super long time horizons to actually figure out what the root cause is. And I think there's also just an enormous amount of preventative screening, right? So right now, healthcare is super one size fits all. It says, okay, when you're 50, for everyone, that's when we're going to start doing a lot of this cancer screening. But, if you understand that, okay, I'm at elevated genetic risk for a specific disease, you can proactively tell your doctor, hey, I know that you want to give me this screening in 10 years, but I actually want to start it 10 years earlier so that you can find out about, whether that disease is manifesting in your body earlier. So there's just an enormous amount that you can do with this information. And I think that, it's funny because, our focus is on, the reproductive use case, right? We want to help couples have healthy babies, but it also ends up being a really motivating factor for the parents, right? Sometimes, you're getting this information to protect a future child, but sometimes the parents are like, oh, I found out that, I'm high risk for X, and now I want to do this so that, I can better be there for my family. You don't want to have your health derail, 5 years, 10 years down the line now that you're actually, planning to be a parent. So I think that that's actually another really beautiful thing about this report is that, we're trying to, protect, a future human, but we also end up, getting the couple and the parents a little bit more motivated to work on something that might not have been on their radar before.
Beautiful. Yeah. Upstream, swim upstream and see what's going there. That's very cool. Yeah. I wanted to go back to a point that I think, did I hear you right, that this test, that Orchid, is actually more detailed, more specific, more broad than like Ancestry.com or 23andMe?
Oh yeah, definitely. So there's like a couple of ways to evaluate it. One is just, okay, how much DNA is being read by a company, right? So a company like Ancestry or 23andMe is doing something called a genotype chip. So that means that they're looking at less than 2% of your genome. So Orchid is looking at much more. We're looking at 100% of your genome. So 3 billion bases as opposed to, less than a million, which is what these other companies are evaluating. That's one way to think about differentiation. The second is, what are the diseases that are actually being evaluated, right? So we're looking at schizophrenia risk, heart disease risk, AFib risk, stroke risk. So when other companies say that they're evaluating risk for these diseases, they're actually only looking at a handful of variants. They're looking at, okay, do you have 5 different SNPs that might contribute to the disease? In contrast, our risk scores are looking at dozens to millions of variants that are collectively involved in driving risk for the disease. So I think it's really just about how much data are you collecting on each individual, and then how powerful is the actual risk score that you're using, right? So now that we have these much larger data set sizes, you can develop you can develop scores that are much more performative than if you're only looking at a handful of variants, which is what other companies are doing. And then I think the third way that you can think about it is, is this clinical grade? So all of our tests are approved by physicians. They're all, include guidance from a genetic counselor. So reports come with a personalized walkthrough that a board-certified genetic counselor conducts. You can synchronously set up a call with a genetic counselor. We'll connect you with specialists. Like, it's really more about making helping make a really high impact decision in your life, which is, how are we going to conceive, as opposed to, curiosity about your ancestry or, your earwax type or something like that. It's sort of different quality of test for a different level of importance for a decision.
Wow, interesting. Oh, that's so cool. Wow. What does a genetic counselor do? What are some of the conversations that they have and advice that they give or referrals that they make? I'm curious about that process.
Yeah, so I think it's really up to the couple. I mean, they're really driving that conversation. The genetic counselor is there to just be a sounding board, be an expert, someone who's really well versed on the literature, really well versed on how these results are generated to help the couple make sure that they understand exactly what their results mean. So I think it's some of the stuff that we've already talked about, right? So, these are genetic risks, okay? They're not a diagnosis. So we don't want to scare people and say,
Sure.
your future child is definitely going to get this disease. That's not what an elevated risk means. It means you're twofold, threefold, fourfold, more likely to develop it. So I think it's really about making sure that parents, future parents, understand that this is a risk estimate. It's a component of overall risk. Normal risk isn't a guarantee of a healthy life. A high risk isn't a guarantee of disease. And just understanding that there's a spectrum and there's a distribution of how your genetics impact your health. So, yeah, I just think that this is a really important decision that people are making is how to conceive, and we just want to make sure that they have an expert by their side who understands genetics inside and out, so that they're not confused with what their results mean. I mean, it's actually really unfortunate what the consequences are when you don't have that expert there. So sometimes with other sort of consumer genetic tests where there's no physician in the loop, there's no genetic counselor in the loop, sometimes people will get a mastectomy because they think that their result means, I'm definitely going to develop breast cancer, therefore I should, make the very, drastic decision of removing that breast tissue. And I think that's sometimes that might be the right choice, but in the case that I'm discussing, it was just a misinterpretation of what her results actually mean, and that's the worst case scenario. And we want to make sure that never happens. And the way that we do that is by making sure that every single test comes with both physician authorization, so you can order it directly on our website, but we actually have an independent physician who's actually reviewing and making sure that the couple is a good candidate. And then once you get your results, everyone is walked through about exactly what the results mean and has the opportunity to consult with an expert. And I think that engagement is super important to make sure that they have a real action plan, right? Because the last thing that we want is you just take the tests and you misinterpret what it means. You make the wrong assumptions about what you should actually do, so yeah, the way that we take that on is by just making sure that we have all the right experts in front of the couple so that they can really make an action plan that makes sense for them.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you nowadays? I mean, with as many things that we're exposed to environmentally, lifestyle factors, epigenetics factors, why wouldn't you use the technology that's available that's so powerful to be able to make smart decisions? And so at the moment that we're right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly how I see it. I mean, right now we have more risk mitigation, more research that we're doing about where we're going to go to lunch, right? We go on Yelp and we look at 100 reviews to make sure that we get a good sandwich for lunch, right?
Oh,
but when it comes to the most consequential decision of your entire life, which is, how are we going to conceive? People are just rolling the dice. They're going in completely blind. They have no idea what genetic risks they carry. They have no idea what genetic risks their partners carry. They have no idea how it's going to combine. And, there's this idea of earned versus unearned bad luck, right? So earned bad luck is sort of like, okay, you're a base jumper. You've been doing crazy jumps and then you broke your leg, right? It's sort of like, well, you kind of expose yourself to much higher risk. So it's sort of not very unusual that you'd end up getting that outcome, right? And then there's the idea of unearned bad luck, right? That's like getting hit by a car, right? It's like you had nothing to do with the fact that someone just decided to, rear end you. And what I think is really exciting about where we are today with this technology is that, health doesn't have to be a lottery ticket that's doled out unequally at birth, right? Now, for the first time ever, couples have the possibility of actually mitigating genetic risk. They have the ability to say that, hey, I want to roll the dice in my favor. I want to stack the odds against disease. And I think that's just a really powerful and exciting capability for a lot of these couples who are some of them who are literally not conceiving because they're so worried about that risk that affected them personally being passed on to a child.
I definitely share in your sentiment that the future of medicine is going to be trackable and specific. It's going to be cellular, it's going to be virtual, it's going to be it's not going to look much like what it looks now, where you I grew up with a family pediatrician, and I saw my doctor until I was like 20, and he knew me, saw me when I was a baby. And I don't think that that's really happening anymore. And the fact that that these technological advancements are coming so quickly and so advanced. I mean, the entire genome, to be able to look at that wide of information, to have that data and to make informed decisions about like you said, the most important decision in your life, and to have a child. I mean, it's huge. It's massive. I go back to the time when we decided that we were going to have our first child, and it's a big deal, and I have lots of friends that had a lot of trouble conceiving. It's stressful. There's just so many things to worry about, and money, and where you live, and timing, and what your parents are going to say, and all this stuff. Like you want to be able to control for the variables that you can, and if you can be informed about what's going on and what sort of predispositions your progeny may or may not have, is I think so vital.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, right? Because after a child's born, right, we do everything to try and give them the best outcome possible, right? Preschool and all these different types of toys and immersion programs, and like if you think about how much that's going to impact their life, I mean, of course, those decisions are important, but for a case like my mom, where she just woke up and her health was hijacked, and she ended up going blind. I mean, what could be more impactful than making sure that your child's life doesn't get hijacked by a disease, right? And that just requires some thinking up front. And, there's obviously nothing we could do in the past, right? We had to roll the dice in the past, but, where we're at today, the fact that you can understand what these risks are ahead of time, I just think is for all of these parents who really care about their children, who are doing everything to make sure that, they get ahead, in school and sports. I mean, all of that's great, but I mean, everything can get ripped away from you if your health gets compromised. So it just seems, it just seems super important to make sure that this type of technology is accessible and available to everyone who could benefit, because it's usually a very personal thing. Most of us take our health for granted until we see a friend or family member or ourselves have all normalcy and their plans ripped away from them. And I think it's actually kind of humbling, COVID is, because we've seen how the entire world, entire cities, entire countries have just been put to a halt by a virus that's a couple of microns in size, right? And that's what's going on in our genetics too, right? We have these programs that can run in our favor or run against us, and sometimes those programs take decades to turn on and trigger some misrepair, some cancer pathway, some cholesterol aggregation pathway, whatever it is that it ends up triggering. But I think COVID is really humbling in that respect, and that it's really taught all of us that health is everyone's top priority.
Yeah, that's for sure. Where did you come up with the name Orchid?
I don't have a good answer for this question.
Oh, really? I like it.
I just like orchids. I think it's sort of like fertility. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll cut that out.
Sorry.
Why does anyone name their child any name? They just liked it,
Yeah. Exactly.
At the time that we're recording this is before the official launch, and but I have to imagine that you've gotten a ton of feedback already. I would love if you could share some testimonials, some responses, some use cases for people that really got it and got a lot of benefit from it.
Yeah, I think that there's a bunch of types of stories that I really like. One type of story is that the couple that's really worried, they have a lot of family history of disease in their family, and they get a result that says, hey, everything's fine. Actually, you guys are normal risk for everything. That's a result I love to hear about. For other folks, they had absolutely no idea that one of them was really elevated risk for a condition. Once they did some digging, they found out that this person in their family who they weren't in touch with very much actually did die of this condition at a pretty young age, and just a lot of times these types of negative information just gets buried and not discussed in the family. So I think that's another type of story that I think is interesting, and sort of that couple ended up becoming much more proactive about managing their heart disease risk. And I think that's again, it's kind of like the result I was talking about earlier, where you go into it saying, oh, I want to protect a future child. The preconception, the couple report ends up saying that, okay, your couple's your future child is going to be at normal risk, but maybe the male partner, you're at elevated risk for heart disease. You need to really address that because you're in the 99th percentile, and this could really impact your your future. So that's sort of one of those outcomes where someone gets to get information much earlier than they might have gotten otherwise, right? It might have been 20 years down the line where they ended up going for preventative screening and finding out that, okay, this disease had progressed much further than they might have wanted. So yeah, I think that the experiences have been really across the board. People who are really worried finding out that they're actually going to be okay, they're at pretty normal risk. People who didn't know that they carried any risk at all, finding out that maybe their future child is going to be likely in the normal range, but individually they carry a risk for something that had previously been buried by a member of their family. So it's really been all across the board.
That's cool. Yeah, the added benefit of learning a lot about yourself is fascinating to me. For lack of a better euphemism, you kind of kill two birds or three birds with one stone, right? Getting the saliva test not only lets you know sort of what sort of risk you're looking for your children, future children, but also for yourself. That's really cool. So I wanted to hear about the embryo testing and how that works, and also I'm curious about, I think other people will too be curious about who all is involved, like which doctors, which labs, how does it work, like who's all involved in that process, and how does the embryo testing actually work?
Yeah, so the embryo report isn't going to be launched at the same time as the couple report. So the couple report is going to be available by the end of the waitlist is open. We're going to be taking folks off the waitlist by the end of April. The embryo report, we're still polishing up. We're going to be publishing some studies later this year, and that'll be available toward Q4, so the end of this year. But in terms of how the embryo report actually works, or what the process looks like there, one thing that I find pretty funny is that most people are familiar with egg freezing. So this is basically the idea of women preserving their fertility by freezing their eggs. But most people don't realize that that's the egg freezing process is actually identical to the IVF process. So basically, the next step after egg freezing. So just to, I guess, give a quick background on egg freezing is women take hormones for a couple of weeks in order to mature eggs in their ovaries and their follicles. Those eggs are extracted by a physician, so that's about a 15-minute procedure. After those eggs are taken out of the body, they're fertilized with a sperm sample from your partner, and then those embryos grow for about 5 days. So it goes from a single cell to about 100 cells. So once you have about 100 cells on day 5, the embryologist will take a few of those cells and send it to Orchid's lab, and then we sequence the genome of each of your embryos and return a report. So what exists today is a much lower resolution, kind of like what we were talking about before with the textbook, where you can either read you can just get the chapter summary, or you can read the entire textbook. So what exists today is that they just tell you the number of chromosomes. So do you have the correct number or the incorrect number of chromosomes? Do you have all the chapters in the book or not? Are you missing an entire chapter? That's the extent of what the testing evaluates for today. And of course, that's really important, right? If you're missing an entire chapter in a book, that usually is pretty deleterious, right? So, for example, for Down syndrome, that's you have actually an extra chromosome 21, so you have an extra chapter in the book.
Right.
So
can I jump in for a second? Because when we were when we had kids, and it was like you went in at week X, we natural pregnancy, and went in for a test, and I don't know how many weeks into the pregnancy it was, but it was basically like, you don't look like you're at high risk for cystic fibrosis. You don't look like you're a high risk for Down syndrome. Okay, you keep cool. You're good. Like, enjoy, have a great pregnancy. Is that that's what it was? Or is that what it is kind of today across the board?
Yeah, exactly. So today, what they're looking for are these, pretty rare conditions, right? Like cystic fibrosis and Down syndrome. They're not looking across the entire genome for what is your susceptibility for a lot of these major diseases. So I'm obviously not. I think it's great that we're doing this type of testing, right? Lots of families have benefited by being able to mitigate rare disease. It's just what's exciting about Orchid. What differentiates it is just the fact that we're looking, at a much more comprehensive scale. We're reading the entire book, we're reading your entire genome, and we're giving you the commensurate insights that you can get from reading the entire book as opposed to reading just the chapter list. So anyway, so what's going on in embryo testing right now is they're just evaluating the chromosome count, which is great. It tells you about Down syndrome, but it doesn't tell you about all these other risks for cancers, diabetes, the diseases that Orchid is testing for. So that's what we're able to provide. We're able to provide not just the chromosome count or chapter summary, but also the risk profile for all these other conditions. And that allows the couple and the clinical team to implant embryos in the order that mitigates risk for the condition that they've identified that they're high risk for. So essentially, during IVF... Oh,
what do you mean by that, the order?
Oh, yeah. So basically during IVF right now, it's kind of like a beauty contest. So you have between, 5, 10 embryos, depends on the age of the couple. And right now there's something called morphology, which is essentially like, how does the embryo look? Does it look like it's going to develop well, or does it not look like it's going to develop well? So that's kind of a beauty contest. You're just visually inspecting, does the embryo look good or bad? And then there's this very rudimentary type of genetic testing, which just looks at, do you have the correct or incorrect number of chromosomes? So you're not you implant one embryo at a time during IVF because you don't want to risk having twins or triplets. So what Orchid helps the clinical team and the couple do is to decide which order the embryos should be implanted in. Right now, they're kind of being, of the embryos that are chromosomally normal, so have the right number of chromosomes, it's just a beauty contest to decide which one, looks the best to implant. So what we're doing is we're providing more information there so that the couple can say, okay, we know we're high risk for cancer, and this embryo is lowest risk for, breast cancer, whatever disease they're concerned about. And then that way they're able to mitigate risk, the genetic risk for that disease.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So you can look at a group of 5 to 10 embryos and do sort of a visual inspection on how they look. And then once you understand which of the embryos are at which level of risk for different potential diseases, and then make an informed decision about which of those embryos gets implanted first, second, third through 10th?
Correct. Yeah. So right now it's just a random choice. So what we're saying is, hey, instead of choosing randomly, why don't you have some more information to decide which one should be implanted in which order? Exactly.
Wow. Oh my gosh, blowing my mind here. Just trying to absorb that a little bit. I mean, wow, cool. For dum-dums like myself, can you make a distinction between what is CRISPR? Is CRISPR way off the tree, totally different thing? How dare you ask that question? Is it sort of similar? Does Orchid in any way sort of inform, or is it part of an eventual process that involves CRISPR?
Yeah. So CRISPR is awesome, but has nothing to do with Orchid. So what CRISPR is it allows you to cut and paste DNA. So CRISPR is really incredible, Nobel Prize winning technology, but it's primarily a really incredible research tool, right? So before it was really difficult to create cell lines with certain properties, right? You had to sort of breed lots of mice in order to get this certain genetic mutation that you wanted to study. But what's really exciting about CRISPR is it allows researchers to make these specific point, cut and paste, just like you do in a file, right? It's really easy to cut and paste in Google Docs or wherever, and then you're able to write what you want to write to your friend. So similarly, for scientists, if they're able to cut and paste DNA at will, they're able to really functionally understand what the mechanism is behind a specific disease. So that's where CRISPR is really exciting, is as a research tool, and people are also developing really exciting gene therapy. So what gene therapy is you just have a broken gene, and you're cutting and pasting that broken gene with a functional copy of that gene. And gene therapy is the super exciting technology for adults, but again, it doesn't really apply to embryos. And I think that CRISPR is really more on the adult side, right? It's sort of like, okay, if you're an adult, if you unfortunately have a broken copy of a gene, hopefully scientists over, a decade or so will be able to develop a gene therapy for you so that you can cut and paste that, that broken copy and replace it with a functional copy.
Got
But
it.
yeah, unfortunately, I'd love to be part of the CRISPR hype, but Orchid is not part of the CRISPR hype. We're much humbler. We're saying, okay, of all of the genetic children that you would normally have, here's a bunch of embryos. Right now, you're choosing randomly. Let's make the choice for the lowest risk, the healthiest possible embryo for you.
Got
So
it.
we're much humbler and much simpler than what CRISPR is doing.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that clarification.
Yeah, of course.
What question have I not asked? What area have we not delved into that's really important or that you're really excited about when it comes to Orchid?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of more just like the vision, like where are we trying to go with this? I mean,
Yeah.
the reason the state of the world today is kind of crazy. I mean, most people don't realize that, over 100 million Americans are living with a chronic disease, and we don't have cures for these conditions. So in the best case, these people are leashed to drugs for life that are treating symptoms rather than root causes. And, for every single disease, there's a genetic component. So, we believe in this future where the next generation doesn't have to live a life that's interrupted by disease. So, we believe that, we can actually extend the health span of the next generation, right? Statistically, if you have fewer variants that are going to, confer risk for disease, then, you're going to get it at a lower rate. And, that's just a future that we're super excited about. Like, what if the next generation just gets disease at lower rates than the current one? I mean, that's really amazing. So that's really what motivates us, is sort of the idea that, we don't have to get our life hijacked by a health condition emerging randomly. I mean, obviously, unfortunately, if you choose to smoke and you develop lung cancer, you can't, as a parent, prevent that negative outcome from affecting your child. But when it comes to your genetics, people say diamonds are forever, but your genetics really are forever, right? Until CRISPR really catches up and we're able to just edit our adult genomes at will. But for now, your genetics are with you for life, and the ability, for me, I'm really excited, when I become a parent, to be able to, mitigate risk for my child, to, just lower the chance that they're going to have all of these conditions that I know run in my family, that I've seen affect different family members. I just think it's a really beautiful, it's sort of the gift of a healthy life, is something that, before it wasn't even possible to dream that we would be able to, affect a future child in that way. And that's just what's really motivating for me about what we're building.
That's a beautiful vision. I love this. This is cutting edge. It's forward thinking. We have this technology. Let's use it for good. Let's be informed. Let's use data to make smart choices, and allow it to affect the greater population so that we can be healthy and strong as much as we can control. Right? I think that's wonderful. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, before I ask the final question, where can people either follow you on social media? Where can they find Orchid on the internet as well?
Yeah, so you can sign up for our waitlist at orchidhealth.com. And if you want to find us on Twitter, it's at Orchid Inc. And I think on Instagram as well, we're also at Orchid Inc. So, we'd love to engage with you however you're thinking about using their product, whatever your family building journey, wherever you're at. We'd love to hear from you. We're building this for couples and for future parents. So let us know what you want. Let us know what you want to be different. I mean, our goal is healthy babies. So let us know what we can do to support you in your journey.
Oh, that's so cool. Very cool. So this final question can be based on anything and everything that you have come to learn or know, some greater truth that you know about the world. And you can elaborate as much or as little. It doesn't have to be specific to healthy babies, but it can be.
Yeah.
Please fill in the blank. Everyone would benefit from knowing.
Oh, interesting. I feel like the obvious answer is, everyone would benefit from knowing their genetic risks, but we kind of already covered that, so maybe I should do something else. I don't know. That's the only one that's coming to mind.
That's
Yeah, okay.
That's fair. That's fine. Yeah.
Cool, cool. Yeah. So everyone would benefit from knowing how their genetics are going to impact their future child's health.
Here, 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 here. Noor, thank you so much for joining me today. I've learned a whole bunch. I know I can think of a couple of people that I'm gonna send your information to, that I'm gonna have them go sign up for the waiting list because they want to make smart family planning decisions. And so I really appreciate you joining me today on the Optimal Performance Podcast.
Thanks so much, Sean. This was amazing. It's awesome to be here today.
And scene. Cool.